Okay. All right.
All right, how we doing?
You think this would get easier having done this so many times now, but I swear, like, all these different services all running at the same time is absolute chaos. But I'll figure it out soon enough. Get a workflow down. But it does look like we're live on LinkedIn, Discord. People can hear you, and yeah. All right, Craig. Beautiful. How about you introduce yourself?
All right, I'm Craig Silverstein. I have a background in tech. Just to, I guess, kind of describe a little bit of the journey. I started my first company back in 2010, 2011. That was in entertainment industry social network. Like many startup founders, their first company is pretty much an experiment to um, see where you can kind of take a business and grow it. From there, I went deeper into the entertainment technology, built global teams around the world for post production. Then got more and more into software, where I started consulting on entertainment tech. I helped scale a company called SyncSketch, which was acquired by Unity Technologies, which is one of the biggest game engines in the world for mobile games. So if you're in the gaming or entertainment space, you may have heard of Unity. And then after that, I was going to go back to consulting and realize that there is a huge opportunity in leveraging AI to increase the value of staff, of companies in the merger and acquisition process, due diligence. And currently, I have a company called The Next Unicorn, which we have an internal AI powered intelligence engine that is currently being retargeted to help executives and really any type of role onboard employees. And when people think of onboarding, they think of HR. I like to describe it as taking that 6 month to a year ramp up time that it takes for someone in a company to really be able to start offering value to the company. We like to take that 6 month to a year and compress it down into a matter of weeks. And we do this through deep analytics of a company and then also the onboarding frameworks that we've created to really get that value and get people to be able to act and make decisions in a really well informed manner in a company. So that's where we're at right now. My roots are in startups, even though a lot of my tech is for mid market enterprise level. So going with back to SyncSketch that I scaled, which was bootstrapped. So we didn't get funding before our exit was huge. So if you're looking to keep as much of your company as possible as well before exiting it, I can help out with that as well. So I guess that's me in a nutshell.
I like you in a nutshell. That touches on a lot of interesting topics. I hope everyone, yeah, can hear you well on all these different platforms that we're streaming to. I had a little bit of a technical jungle to navigate through today, but seems like everyone's okay. So yeah, those of you just joining us, use the text chat. Post questions for Craig. I will relay them and get you answers, feedback, advice, insights. If you're working on something, you're not really sure, what question to ask. You can just share what kind of struggles or concerns you have, where the challenges might be with your business. Please, yeah, again, don't be shy. And Kimberly, William, great to see you over here on Start Mata hanging out with us. Raise your hand, use the text chat if you want to come up on stage, or you can also just post questions in the chat as well. With that said, while we wait for some wonderful questions to come in, something that comes up a lot is customer discovery and learning from your customers. You're doing a lot of that right now with this pivot that you've seen, moving into onboarding for employees. I'm curious, what does that process look like? What's the methodology behind there in terms of how you're setting the goals for the information that you want to get from the people that you're talking with, and how do you set that up and go into those situations so these people feel excited and empowered to share with you their feedback or their opinions, their ideas?
Yeah. First, I have to emphasize the power of networking in this process. It's huge because you meet people who they themselves or they potentially know people who are willing to offer feedback to you without feeling like they're entering this process that's painful. Anytime you ask someone for feedback, and actually asking for feedback can be a super great way to get someone to use your product as a selling opportunity as well. So you can actually use that feedback later on when you're actually going to market with something. But in the initial stage, you want to make it getting feedback as low touch as possible. And I think leveraging your network, you already have some trust built, but you want to make sure that you're not asking people in your network that are going to offer bias in their opinions as well about your product. So be careful there. That is a little nuanced disclaimer where you want objective feedback and you want real feedback from your target audience. I can give you an example. One of the reasons I built Minerva Engine after leaving Unity was because I saw a lot of opportunity at the executive level in large companies to make better decisions and make decisions based on the strategic opportunities and the uh, strengths that a company has. So when I started building Minerva Engine, I actually asked ex president, CTO from Unity. So very high up in a relatively large company. They were 50 billion market cap at one point, so they're not a tiny startup. Um, I met with him and I showed this person who is actually had moved to an autonomous vehicle driving company. So they were later acquired by GM. So all big people, all big, well-known people in the network. I teamed up with this executive and said, "Hey, um, I have intelligence reports that I'm building leveraging an AI-powered system, and I want to know how useful they are." And he started giving me really great feedback, to include things that I had not even thought of before. And one of the things I was looking for was, is my product valuable at all? How far away is it from becoming valuable? And does this person get my product enough? And is he close enough in my target audience to offer me the right feedback? So I took that feedback, I incorporated in, started making updates to the system, and absolutely at the executive level, for decision making in large companies, the product got better and better as I started incorporating this feedback. Now, this was one person who happened to be a very great target for the product itself. I had gone through numerous contacts in my network and started attending events to meet people who seemed like my target audience. Met people from AT&T, met people from very tiny companies that are doing staffing in companies, executive search firms. My business partner had introduced me to lots of people. People I met in
To
805
meet people.
startups started introducing me to other people and saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm not sure if this person would get value from your product or not, but it might be worth reaching out." I always take them up on the offer to make a connection and show people what I'm doing. And I think one of the big blockers, just to kind of wrap this question up, one of the big blockers for a lot of startups and especially startup founders or solopreneurs is that they have this idea and they're afraid to share it because they're afraid it will be stolen. They're afraid it's not quite where it needs to be to present to someone. And I would say you don't have to start huge. You don't have to go straight to the CEO of a giant enterprise and start asking them for feedback. You can start small, but do not smother a great idea because you're overprotective of it. I always tell people the worst place for a great idea is in the dark. So definitely think about that as well.
No, I love that because I mean, we have conversation all the time, and I do these a lot with different mentors as well. And like, when it comes to the process of making those real authentic relationships, those connections, it almost always starts with seeking those people out for feedback and advice. Essentially, approaching people as if they're mentors, even if they aren't like labeled as mentors or they've never seen themselves in the position of being a mentor before, but you just want to empower them through their ability to share their opinions, their experiences with you, their ability to help you learn from their mistakes and triumphs and feel good about that exchange as a fellow human being, right? I mean, we're social creatures. There's something very innate and special about engaging with other people like that. And I love what you said about like not hiding what you're working on and being this, stealth company, which is something got so blown out of proportion for so long, and it still kind of is. But I feel like there's been a little bit of a pushback on that, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, the more you hide what you're working on, the less opportunities you have to get the support you need or be directed to the people who can provide you that support. And more than that, it robs you of these opportunities to engage with other people and see if they're people you want to be working with, either hiring them as an employee down the line or bring them on as an investor or a co-founder, anything else. Like all of this, we said it last time we were doing this, but success is a game of matchmaking. And the more exact that match is for your needs and what you've created and who it's for and all these different elements, the more likely you're going to be successful because you're resonating with these people. You're resonating on both sides. They're resonating with you and being excited about what you're working on and want to be a part of that. And then on your side, you're like, wow, I really love being around this person. I enjoy this, like, this relationship we have. I feel good about this instead of everything that comes with a bad relationship, right? Like distrust or concern, conflict, all these different elements. And, I'd love to hear your take on this too. But when it comes to business relationships, whether it's investors or co founders or employees, onboarding, how much emphasis do you put and what is your process to make sure that you're connecting with the right match, whatever that might be?
Yeah. I don't want to reinvent the wheel with this question because there are some really brilliant answers out there. And if any of you are familiar with Andreessen Horowitz, I think it was Mark Andreessen has kind of like a foundational pillars of a startup. And for those, it was product, market, and team. And his philosophy was you can always sacrifice product, um, whether the product needs to change, update itself, evolve. That is fluid. A great team and the target market, you need those under any circumstances whatsoever. Those are much less fluid in terms of what you can sacrifice and the value of that. You have to have a good team. You cannot sacrifice the quality of your team, your partnerships, your customers, your co-founders. All of that is super, super key. The other part is the market. And that's really going to determine the trajectory and scale and reach that your company has. So again, you can make a pivot with your product. You can do different things to uh, evolve or change the core market. But that gets difficult to do because that's going to change your business plan, your go to market plan, a lot of different things in the business. So it's best to start out with the problem, the market, and the statistics. And that's why with startups, and it gets kind of beat over the head, tam, sam, sam, looking at the market, really that's an exercise to get to know your company's potential
Hmm.
based on the product that you have. And I tell startup founders a lot of the time, be realistic with that exercise. If you're going to market with a product, don't just say, oh, our product software and 100% of companies use software, so we have a giant market. No, don't do it that way. Honestly, look at who you're selling your product to, who's going to use it, how many companies you can facilitate at your current stage as customers, and how you can grow that based on how your company is going to evolve. And that helps you build an actual plan. And you're going to notice when I start talking, the reason why I'm so long winded with a lot of answers is because you want to start with the concept, but you have to turn that concept into an executable framework, because execution is where companies get held up. Um, so just to come full circle with this one again, I think the Andreas and Horowitz pillars of don't sacrifice team, don't sacrifice market. Your product's going to evolve. That is most flexible. Um, so for the relationships and the importance of things, I think they have a really solid foundation for that.
Yeah, I like this too because it kind of plays into design thinking and, establishing the goals, the results that you want to achieve, but also being cognizant, like you said, of the unique situation that you're in because everyone has different limitations, different resources, different strengths, different weaknesses, different relationships and level of influence with those relationships, right? It's so easy for founders to lose sight of that and think that they're way more equipped than they are just because they have the drive. And this has been another like toxic kind of element of startup culture, entrepreneurship culture is just this idea that you got to just work harder than everyone else and things will work out. But that's not true because you could be like killing yourself as a result of that, like quite literally, right? And it's so important to remember where you are currently and to like work within those limitations and be okay with that. Because if you have a plan, well, a strategy and then a plan to execute that strategy, right? You can still move forward and get closer to success and open up these new doors that are unavailable to you currently to then slowly ramp up. And this kind of plays into your bootstrapping, right? But before we get into that, we've got a shy group of people watching with us. The whole reason we're doing this is so Craig can answer your questions. So please don't worry. There's no dumb question. The whole point of Craig being here is to help you learn and as a byproduct, help everyone else learn as well from the questions being asked. And again, if you're unsure of how to phrase a certain question, just share what your struggles, what your concerns are, what your challenges are. So yeah, please, I want Craig to be talking to you, not me. So yeah, in the meantime, while we wait for some questions to come in, Craig, going back to the bootstrapping and the fact that you guys made it to exit without raising funding. Like, what sort of challenges were you experiencing as a team to, I suppose, fight the overwhelming existential push to raise money as soon as possible? And what kept you like able to grow the business to that point without raising the outside capital?
Yeah. Um, so I'll get back to the, I'll map out how I'm going to answer this question. Um, the biggest difficulties, I think prioritization was the toughest, most challenging, yet most important thing. And I think that always is. And when I say prioritization, I also mean juxtaposition of what you do and when you do it, the order of things, not just the priority, but how everything's lined up. If you're doing things in parallel, if you're doing stepping stones, um, all of that is important. The second part is how the team approached this, because I wasn't a co-founder. I started on actually as an external consultant who was brought in-house to kind of operate as the COO. But the uh, big thing, and I'm talking about Sync Sketch when I'm talking about this, because that's what went to exit. The prioritization, or the opportunities, I should say, that we were looking at, there were a few. One is, do we kind of push forward to funding? Do we take a route with private equity? There were private equity opportunities to get partially acquired or get large investment in through a large equity stake. And then there's also the full out acquisition, which is obviously the route that uh, the co-founders had fully committed to in getting acquired by Unity. There's a big difference between what's right for the current time and what's right in the long term. So those are all things that I can dive a little bit deeper into. But beyond that, so I'd say first thing, the priorities, I'll touch on the opportunities that were available, but also the ability to remain bootstrapped depends very heavily on how the co-founders drive certain initiatives forward. And it actually has a little bit to do with everything because that will affect your priorities and it will affect what you can do for an exit and what you're going to do for investing. If you've ever heard VC sometimes say this company is not investable, um, that is something that has to do with how co-founders actually set up their business, their product, and establish themselves in the market. And I'd say Andreessen Horowitz's team, market, and product all play a pretty big role in that type of opportunity. I'd say range of opportunities that a company could move towards. So one of the big things with Sync Sketch is that there was a very deep penetration in the education market first. And that was super important to get daily active users. So if you're in software, you know, daily active users is going to be ultra important. You want people coming back to your platform as much as possible on a daily, regular basis. And that uh, shows you basically the opportunity and the value of your product in terms of how frequently do people want to use it and is it good enough to use consistently. um, as a startup, it will also shed light on some problems that a company could run into where if they have a lot of users but they're not coming back consistently, and that's kind of product metrics you're looking at, it could show that your business model is flawed, not necessarily your product, or that you're tackling a market that fluctuates in terms of usage. So that's all things to look at as a startup. But going back to the bootstrapped part of the question, because I know um, there's a lot involved here. One of the first things is set up with your founders to be as economical as possible. The the expenses, especially in the tech sector, they could seem small at first, but they compound as you start to do more testing, as you start to get closer to go to market. Things get very, very expensive. Second, you're marketing too early. You're selling too early. Not necessarily selling too early in that, but if you're throwing money into marketing before you fully understand your customer and before you have a product ready to go, um, don't put a lot of money into marketing. It just doesn't make sense. And I say this probably every call that people are putting too much into marketing too soon without understanding who they're marketing to and how their product affects their daily lives. So always, always, always be economical with marketing. And when you do hire a marketing team, be very economical with that team, meaning you're going to be looking at conversion rates, your pipeline, time to close, uh, capture leads in the marketing pipeline for your sales teams, and then close those sales. And you have to look at the time of all that. If you're spending too much money in one area of that sales pipeline or marketing pipeline, focus on it, look at it, reduce the costs, get the impact where it needs to be, because everything's time, impact, quality, kind of that project management framework where you're looking at time, quality, scope, and uh, cost. So keep all those in flux and really consider that. The other thing is procurement. People don't spend a lot of time on procurement, and you should be muscling companies, no matter how big or small you are, throw some muscle behind getting better rates for software. For if you're using Stripe or ChargeBee or something for invoicing and collecting money from your customers, whatever the case might be, argue better rates. They're probably charging 3 to 5% per transaction on you. There's nothing that says you can't say, listen, we're going to go with someone else unless we can knock that down a percentage point or two. And that's a percentage point or two on your entire margin, which is actually huge, especially as you scale and grow. So thinking about all of those things, that's just your typical COGS, cost of goods sold, and your operating expenses, your OPEX. So always keep that in mind on the financial side. Um, yeah, I think for staying bootstrapped, I mean, that's really it. Look at your costs, look at how you're building. You need to make pretty tough decisions. Do I hire someone for equity or do I hire someone for out of pocket costs to the founders? Do you get I mean, yeah, there's different things you can do, different deals you can make. It's something you need to think about. I always tell founders, don't give away your company unless it's a do or die situation, because founders all the time are left with nothing after an exit. Um, the amount of dilution that could happen as a company grows, even if it's unexpectedly, can cost a lot. And then the last thing for this question, because I know this is a long one, being bootstrapped is very complex. That's why there's a lot that goes into it, and it changes for almost every single company on how to remain bootstrapped. It's almost like an art form. But the other piece of it, oh, what was I just going to say? Because I paused right there. Um, the other and very important piece is target the right customers. Because if you start targeting the wrong customers, you're going to spend a lot of money doing that. Um, and you're not going to generate revenue as quickly. And I think the biggest kind of catalyst for remaining bootstrapped is getting a few customers that can fully support all your operations, and all of your cogs and allow everything to scale. So for Sync Sketch, I mean, it was getting the major studios involved, and we had to prepare the company, and that's partially why I was brought on board. Was that they were very deep in the education space, but it wasn't enough to sustain a company. So it was about transitioning to the enterprise landscape, and they had to get enterprise ready. So that meant really transforming the company and incorporating that transformation into the product and then the business model. So the all three have to operate in fluid when you're making that transformation. The business model, the company, and the team, all the players have to align and understand exactly how they're transforming that so that the customers are getting the right value at the enterprise level, but you're not creating a brand new product at the same time. It's very important.
I'm curious with that transition from essentially consumer to enterprise, business to business. Did the mission change? Did the culture change? Did the values change? Or did the vision, was that the main component that changed?
Um, the culture was very well constructed from the beginning. I'd say the culture itself did not change. Prioritization changed, and that's a lot different than culture. So the product roadmap definitely evolved where the features being built were no longer in support of what individual users or schools, universities may have wanted. And it felt like a huge sacrifice. So part of getting enterprise ready, security, you'll see the single sign on, you'll see the multi-factor authentication. You'll see for we were a review app for animation, graphics, 3D models. So in that, there's a workspace, right? So SyncSketch has workspaces, and workspaces had to transform where instead of being built for individual users or small teams, they really had to build up and be enterprise ready. So you can even go on the Sync Sketch site, and I think there's different things about the enterprise business tier. And those are probably relatively old, like around the time those changes were actually made to the product, maybe soon thereafter they were released. So if you look at the evolution of uh, the product through those articles, you'll kind of get a good idea of like, oh wow, they threw some muscle behind this stuff. And the reason why there's blog articles and things like that on the site about it is because it was a major transformation. We wanted people to know about it. We wanted the enterprises, the major studios, and by major studios I mean like the top of the top streaming platforms, the large studios in the Hollywood system and beyond. They would go to the website. One of the first things is how much integrity does this company have? And you need to present yourself as you've done it before. Even if you haven't, you need to prove that your uh, product meets the standards and criteria that they're going to ask for. And like I said, some of that seemed like a sacrifice because we weren't building out product features that are usable to the actual end user who just wants to review their artwork or their 3D animation or their 3D models. They don't care about the enterprise workspace. Their company cares about the enterprise workspace and with the security of it and stuff like that. So you have to cater to a procurement team as well as the end user. And sometimes it feels like you're prioritizing the wrong thing, but you might not be. It depends on, will enterprises use your product now?
That's a lot of wonderful insights, and I hope it's helpful for people watching. To real quickly summarize the themes, don't be in a rush. Focus on the matchmaking component with who your product is for and why it's for them or service. And like the way we put it often when we're talking about this is you want them to know what it's going to be like to experience working with you, using your product or service, how that's going to be enjoyable for them and different from what everyone else is offering them and beneficial. And that's how they arrive at the value, right? And I like this too, where you're essentially like saying that you want to be viewed as a specialist to these people, right? So they trust you and they can believe in you. My background is photography, as we've talked about before. And one of the first things I learned about putting together a portfolio was you don't want to come off as a generalist. You don't want to have like architecture pictures with portraiture, with concert images or whatever it is. Even if you shoot all that and you're great at all that, you want to separate and isolate these different pieces of content from each other so you look like a specialist. You are the specialist of portraiture. You're the specialist of automotive photos, whatever it is. And that's going to command more respect, more trust, and also a higher fee from these people. It's like going to the doctor, right? You go to a general practitioner and it's like, okay, that was in America. That was like, $100 for a visit. You go to a brain surgeon and they're like, oh, that's $100,000 to fix you. You're like, oh shit, right? So same kind of mentality. And I love too about you pointing out the importance of achieving product market fit first before you start investing in the marketing arm, because until you have that, you're really going to be struggling with a bunch of unknowns and assumptions about who your ideal target customer is, what their motivations are, what their culture, their values are, how that aligns with your brand and the way you do things, and make them feel seen and heard and catered to and a part of something bigger, which is something that a lot of people overlook when it comes to like branding and marketing. It's like I use the bottled water example all the time, right? It's like the difference between someone choosing a bottle of Arrowhead water versus Voss versus Smart Water or something else, right? Each of these brands, even though they're like the same product in a different package, are appealing to a person's identity, the way they see themselves or the way they want to be perceived by other people. It's like, oh yeah, I'm carrying this Fiji water because I want people to know or see me as a beach goer, a surfer person, right? Versus a different water that's like more mountainy or something like that. It's just like the simplest little things, but I think it's so insightful and so good that you like what you share, these insights touch on these very like core elements of just the overall iterative process of having assumptions, testing those assumptions, learning as much as you can from those experiments, and then iterating as you go to be better at matchmaking in regards to how you present yourself, who you're targeting, and making again this alignment feel much more cohesive between you and who you're trying to service or sell to, or provide something to. So yeah, really great. um, Jorge Perez has a question. How difficult is it to bring a new automotive brand in today's world standards? This is a really wide one, but I think it kind of plays into your background because you do a lot of market research, right, Craig? And so I'm kind of curious, for someone that wants to start their own automotive company from the ground up. We've talked to Jorge before a bit. I believe it was you, Jorge, in regards to their background as a mechanic. They've studied a bunch in terms of like mechanic engineering with cars and automotive industry, and they really want to bring a higher quality, more affordable car to the market. Um, so just as like the high level, starting with this question, what sort of like advice or ideas would you have for that?
Yeah. Um, what I do know about the automotive industry is that it is very expensive to bring uh, products to market. So unless there is very heavy investment from other car manufacturers, and I would say that's a great place to start, because if you look at the automotive industry, some of the trends that I do know are that they buy each other out. It's very frequent. And in the case of, I did some research on a company called Cruise that does self-driving autonomous vehicles. You may have heard of them a little while back. They're kind of like a Waymo, but R&D is super expensive, especially for autonomous stuff. So depending on what you're actually doing, the expenses will fluctuate. I think regardless, it's definitely a more expensive industry. Both R&D and actual manufacturing contains very heavy costs. But in the case of Cruise, they ended up being bought out by GM because their R&D was super heavy. They actually had to pause operating their vehicles on the roads because of an accident. So because of that one little hiccup, and for any industry, or not industry, any type of vehicle, you could think of vehicles have recalls all the time. Anything from a security system to brakes to engine, different things going on. That could get super expensive too if that's not executed flawlessly. So you look at all these R&D expenses, um, and when GM acquired Cruise, they acquired them to compete with Tesla, right? Cruise started off creating a Uber fleet kind of style model that Waymo has capitalized on, and it just wasn't quite working out in that direction. So GM acquired them, is probably going to strip the company apart, take the technology, and put it into their personal vehicles. So you're probably going to see a lot of GM vehicles start to have autonomous driving capability. So that's an example of how a company that does have high R&D costs can get acquired. I'd say that's not the best way to get acquired. You want to start making money and get acquired at a premium rather than get into trouble because your expenses are so high and a company acquires you at a very low valuation. So those are all things to think about. But I would say you don't have to um, aim for the moon in your first shot, even though your vision could contain that. So you could start smaller with thinking about technology for eco efficiency, or doesn't necessarily, I know anything autonomous is crazy expensive with the LiDAR technology and all that stuff. But depending on what you're focusing on to make that improvement, um, there's a few things. The improvement should be substantially better than where we're at now because every auto company is constantly evolving. Some of them have a lot of technology sitting in the back room that they'll release when they feel like the timing is right. Um, so think about how can I 10x or more the value of the industry by putting this part or product forward. And it if you're interested in vehicles themselves, it could be anything from how a gas cap's manufactured to how engines are running to how to charge batteries faster. Like the possibilities are endless, especially for right now, because I'd say the electric EV market and other things with it's transforming super fast, the automotive industry. Even computer systems and dashboards. I know like Unity is coming out with announcements all the time of they're working with Mercedes Benz or all these other car companies. So the possibilities are endless. The biggest problem is that it's just very expensive. I mean, somebody's got to do it. So if you have the drive to focus on that industry, team up with investors. Don't forget about grants, because if you're doing something that significantly improves the environment, of course, depending on who's in the government and how they view eco efficiency and things like that, different grants might be available. So it's it's complicated. There's no easy answer to say how do I go to market with automotive in the best way possible. It's definitely situational.
Yeah, Jorge added a little bit of extra as getting started. What I wanted to do was use Mazda's and Toyota's platforms to make some of the models I have in mind. I think that's a great like starting point.
Mhm.
Because like for something like this, well, even like with software, right? Like there's a process to all of this to bring it to market, to make an idea that's intangible in your head into a tangible representation of what you want to bring to market. And that's what, like it starts with like all the documentation side of stuff, your mission, your values, your culture that you want to establish, and then it feeds into who you want this for, why you're doing this for them, what again is going to make this enjoyable to experience for those people and thus provide benefits to them, and then the value, right? And you just start like with brainstorming it, get it all written down, and then once you have this you know dump of written representations of your ideas, then you start moving into the mock-ups session. And for software, it's doing information architecture and mapping, the wireframes, of course, and then just like showing how the user flows within your product, right? You do the same thing for a car. Mock up what you think the car should look like, and if Jorge is saying uh, what you have available and what you feel comfortable with is using Mazda and Toyota platforms to build on top of to make a prototype. I think it's a brilliant starting point. I think, and Craig, you can add to this, when it comes to rallying people around you, whether those are co-founders, investors, partners, getting a grant from different sources, and I posted in the chat, government, universities, and nonprofit foundations are like the main ones giving grants away. Like the more you have this refined idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can represent that through the execution within your limitations, the more you can build again trust in these other people that you want to rally around you, and show that you're not just another jackass with an idea. There's way too many jackasses with ideas, and it's not a bad thing for jackasses that have ideas. It's just that they're jackasses when they only have an idea and they think that's enough to win them favors or capital, or whatever it is they want to do to pursue this, right? And so yeah, Jorge, I think is brilliant as a starting point. Craig, any other input insights in regards to getting started with this?
Yeah. On the funding front, looking at where would I start with something like that if you are looking to get some capital injection? One angle is to look at different events that Mazda or these other car companies are throwing. Try to get attendees lists and see what investment firms are actually going to those events, because that means it's probably part of their portfolio. And that means that they're actually actively looking to make investments in either that company or other companies that are there at these events that might be supportive of the industry. So I think those kinds of lists and that kind of targeting could be super useful. And they have every industry has also um, grant heavy companies. So you look at Microsoft and LinkedIn, they have their own like VC kind of frameworks that they look at to inject either grants or capital into companies. Also, Epic Games, for example, as a software company with Unreal Engine, has their Epic grants that they do. And I actually know several founders that have gotten capital injection from those. NVIDIA, anything in the tech space, they're also offering grants or capital injection. So you can look at the automotive industry for this and see like, are there any grants? Of course, you have to look at the requirements. And that's one thing for any startup looking for grants. Look at the actual requirements of what the grants ask for. So if you don't feel like you're 100% there on some of them, it's not like applying for a job where you only need 60% of the requirements to actually get a foot through the door if you put a good impression. It's actually a bit tougher where you want to meet those requirements or show that you can very clearly, because where they put their money is it's important to them as well that they're investing in the right things, especially if it's a grant. So be conscious of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, again, insight, and it's helpful. Also, it goes back to the matchmaking aspect of all of this, right? And the more time you take to research the different grants that are available and what they're looking for, why the grant exists, because there's a very specific mission behind that, and it can vary from agenda to agenda. But the more you understand this, the more it helps you also rethink what, again, your mission is, what your values are, the culture you're building, right? And I'm not saying to be inauthentic in it and reshape something to match, a grant provider so you fit that, but there are ways to ask deeper questions about what it is that you represent and how you're representing it, and really kind of like make it more authentic to yourself and your team, and then use that to start to look for grants that align with that, right? So it helps you be better at seeking out the right grants that are more likely for you to win them from like the higher level. And then as you dig into like the specific requirements of the grants, that's where you reframe your messaging and how you're presenting what you do and how you do it in a way that aligns the priorities together, right? And you've mentioned priorities many times in different contexts of what you're doing, but I mean that's what project management's all about. If you look at any project management framework, and a lot of what you're describing, in my experience with Scrum, is very much Scrum related. Like how do you determine what's the priorities based on what your next tasks and milestones are that you need to meet in order to move forward, and then identifying the dependencies and which ones are the easiest for you to achieve given the unique situation you're in currently, and then again move forward and move forward. So yeah, anyone that's listening that's interested in this stuff, looking for help on how to manage whatever you're working on, look into project management frameworks, Scrum, Agile being like the most, like, I guess well-known ones in the software world today, but anything that's kind of rooted in lean methodology and requiring the least amount of investment to make those steps forward is where I kind of like find myself a big proponent of. Yeah, usually like waterfall being the old ways. It's too investment heavy, and it's making too much of a bet on this huge investment paying off in the future, rooted in way too many assumptions. So just things to look at. Yeah. Okay, so we got another great question. This is from Aiden over on LinkedIn. When starting with a new SaaS product, how do you evaluate what the bounds should be for your free tier? Should you always have a free tier? How does your capital runway factor into the decision? This is a good one.
Yeah. Um, should you always have a free tier? No, it really depends on what you're doing. Free tiers have been super useful to get people to actually log on to the product. It's kind of like one of those things where if a company doesn't ask you for your credit card to join some kind of thing that they're going to provide some value to you for, like it makes the level of resistance lighter in terms of going through. And I always tell people anytime you build a product, you have to reduce friction at every single step of the way, whether it's reducing the amount of clicks to log on to a product, to sign up to a product, to begin using and getting value from the product. Tiering is an art form in itself. The first step is drastically understanding how your customer perceives value um, in their day to day. So you want to think about, what can I offer for free to show the customer that there is a valuable product here, but there is more. And you want to turn that free tier into a very specific street or lane that you are directing the customer very purposefully down, because they are going to run into a door that they need to unlock to solve their biggest problem. So whatever the free tier solves should be, it should absolutely add value, but it should not solve their entire problem so that it's impossible to upsell someone. uh, I would also think about tiering um, by customer profile, right? So if you're offering a product to individual users, those individual users are actually a market pool for enterprises. If you're working in an industry where those individual users will want to use your product at work as well, if they're not using it at work, or if they start using it at work, what you want is the enterprise in SaaS. You want, if it's B2B, you want the enterprise. If it's B2C, you want mass groups of people who are willing to spend a few bucks. And the first dollar is always the hardest. Once you're able to get people to spend at least $1, not that you should price your product at $1, but getting them to spend the first time is always the hardest. Um, but you want to think of it as an upsell opportunity, not giving away a product for free. So how you frame it's super important. For Sync Sketch, individual users on personal products would use it all the time on their own art, on their own animation. Professors might use it, things like that. But there's going to be a limit where, and how you place that limit is going to be super important. If you are restricting the number of times somebody can do something, they will get upset because they're like, "Oh, you're just restricting this because you're now offering the same thing at a price that I was getting for free before." So it creates a little animosity there. Not that it's always wrong, but you will get that little like, "Oh man, this company's now trying to gouge me," even though it's not gouging. The other thing is to just limit features. So, for example, the difference a lot of times between a consumer grade tier and an enterprise tier of something has to do with the security features, has to do with the things that I was talking about getting enterprise ready. So, that should be a natural flow from one tier to another. One of the biggest things that you want to think about is the gap between one tier versus another tier too big or too small in terms of the value and the target customer that I'm actually looking at? Um, in those cases, if you have two tiers and it's like enterprise or consumer, there might actually be room for a middle tier to create that natural upsell of different users. So, for example, for a long time, Sync Sketch had a pro tier and a enterprise tier, and then way later on, right before acquisition, we came out with a team tier because we saw a natural upsell there. Another thing you'll notice, Sync Sketch and pretty much every software company sometimes has pricing increases or changes in limits. Let me give you a super secret. Don't tell anyone about this. It's a super secret strategy to be able to more deeply um, generate revenue by not necessarily revolutionizing your monetization strategy. But if you come out with a release, you're going to put limits on your lower tiers to upsell them to your higher tiers. People are going to get upset. You're going to offer them an email discount to level up so that they actually tip into the new tiers, something like that. That's all the basic stuff. Now, where it gets more challenging um, is the problem of analyzing the amount of churn you're going to have, the amount of customers that are going to leave you, to the amount of new revenue you're going to generate, while also holding true to your values, while also showing that customers are actually getting a more positive experience through this transformation without them thinking that you're bullshitting them, because that's another thing. They will see it and they will call you out on it. One way to update that whole mix is to have a larger rebranding change, not rebranding of the entire company, but rebranding change of the tiers where there's a lot of changes going on and the customer is not fully sure where they're getting whacked over the head with these limits and things like that, or where they're actually getting more value, because they'll look at things and they will try to make sense of it all and they will want to feel like they're getting ripped off. But the more you're able to create a brand new experience of something, while it's not actually necessarily an entirely brand new experience, it's still the same product. If you wrap it in a rebranding campaign of the tiers, it could help. But always offer a friendly discount to tip people in a better tier or something that makes them feel like they're getting some kind of win. It will help reduce churn for sure.
That was freaking insightful, really good. Aiden, I hope that was helpful. Aiden, if you got follow up questions, now's the time. Unless it is too. We've got an hour. We've done an hour. Craig,
I
how
could
how
go
are
a
you
little
feeling?
over.
All right,
Yeah,
so
let's
let's
keep
let's
going.
yeah, let's see if there's any final questions that come in. Everyone that's watching, now's the time. Last call for questions. Post them in the chat, and I will relay. And then again, William, Kimberly, if either of you two would like to jump up on stage and ask questions directly, feel free. Microphone, camera's optional. But yeah, last call. Yeah, I was talking to Jorge a bit in chat, just about like this idea of like acceptance and patience playing into priorities, because they were saying that they recently were let go from a job, and it's definitely caused a bit of a hiccup for them to overcome and be able to focus on this passion, this ambition they have to grow this new company. And I'm curious, in your experience, Craig, um, I was explaining how business is a never-ending roller coaster with endless hiccups and derailments and surprises that you think you can plan for and you think that you're ready for, but in some cases, like even if like some of like the resources are there and the support systems there, it's still an emotional just slam to your soul in some cases. And I'm curious, in your experience, how have you experienced that? How have you learned to overcome that and kind of use that in a productive, healthy way to keep moving forward, that is.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really great question. I think emotionally and physically running a startup, even as a side project, even if it's not your core focus, it takes a toll and it takes energy. And when you have bad days, it feels like everything is actually falling apart. Whether it is or whether it isn't a bad day, just it makes it feel like the end is near. One of the things is to first take a step back, breathe, and look at everything that is going right and why it's going right first, right? That gives you a little charge saying, yes, I can do this. Yes, I have done this before. Um, yes, I I am empowered to keep moving forward and to fix things. Now, once you realize mentally that you have that. Another thing that I do for people that want to get out there physically, I do triathlon training. I cycle a couple times a week. I go for a run a couple times a week. I would say that not only helps me physically and gives me more energy from the day to day, but it actually helps me mentally as well. I do this type of exercise where I start concentrating on self talk, where I am literally thinking about things that I can do, contribute, um, things that will make me feel empowered to be able to get activities done that I know are on my to-do list, to solve problems that are happening. And trust me, as a startup founder, once the wheels get moving, the problems don't slow down. They just you get better. It's like that saying, life doesn't get easier. You just get better at solving the problems that life throws at you, and you become more resilient. Those are kinds of things that I think about when I exercise. I'd say like exercise is underrated for founders. And I feel like that's why a lot of those people, especially on LinkedIn, I get hit up all the time from like these exercise groups for founders and things like that. I'm sure they work. I'm not a part of any, but because I do so much training on my own. But exercise, get that positive mental, and I think exercise, like I said, there's physical, of course, perks to it, but mentally is where it really helps create resilience and a more positive outlook on things. So get the mind straight first. Once you feel empowered to start solving the problems, look at what support you need to solve the challenges that are making you feel like you're getting like kicked while you're on the ground. Like you want to really say like, what support do I actually need? Do I need someone in my network to give me a pep talk? Do I need new hires? Do I need money to get new hires? Like look at realistically what's going to solve your problems, because if you just focus on the problems without what's going to solve them, um you're going to be worrying about things instead of actually coming up with solutions and things like that. That's why I think a mentor is also super great to help you objectively look at how to overcome things. They're not going to solve your problems for you, but they will be there as a source of insight and a source of motivation to be able to overcome things. And a lot of times, mentors have been where you have been already. So I think that is going to be a huge step along the way. So, your mind, exercise, mentors, um, and looking at problems objectively. There's actually a framework that I created for problem solving. I want to see if I could find it. The acronym was OTAP. So it was objective. Let me write this out to see if I can. Okay, objective. Uh, oh, I forget what T stand for. Um, Let me hold on. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to pop this open because it's going to be super useful. Let me put it's called The Multiverse of Team Leadership. It's a book that I'm writing. Uh, I've actually been writing for 6 years now. I should have been done already, and I've been slacking. Um, but I'm going to pop this book open and let's oh, there it is. Okay, let me look up this acronym for you. Okay, so it stands for Objective Task Environment People Problem. Write that down because it's going to be super important, the things that you want to look at. So you're looking at the objective, not the problem first. You're looking at where do I want to be? Because the problem might not actually be a problem if it's not affecting where you want to be. It could be one of those things where you're worried about something that doesn't exist. We do that all the time. Worry about the end of the world. The end of the world, we have absolutely no control over to a very large degree, sitting in our family room watching Netflix. So um, make sure that your objectives are clear and that you know where you want to go. Next is the task. What tasks are you actually doing to reach your objectives? And then you can look at Um, the environment will come with the task. As you start looking at the tasks, you'll be able to see more clearly the environment and how it's affecting the tasks that you actually have. And then look at all the people involved. Who do you have working on the task, working on the company, partnering with you and your network, your mentor, your employees, all that stuff. And then look at the problem. And now that you've looked at all of that stuff before looking at the problem's going to seem a lot easier to fix. So instead of seeming like something that's out of your control, you'll be able to get clarity on, is it actually in or out of my control? And do I have the resources, the people, the environment, um, the right objective? Is all that stuff able to help me solve this problem? So um, that acronym OTEP, I think, could be super useful. The other thing to think about is locus of control, right? And everyone has, it's a continuum, how much control they actually believe they have in their life. And as a founder, it's going to be really important to kind of know where you sit on that continuum. Do you have a very internal locus of control where you feel like everything is your fault and everything is in your power to control? Or do you have a very external locus of control where you feel like you don't have control of much and you're kind of a victim of whatever the world dishes out at you? And most people are somewhere very much in the middle where they realize they have some control over things and less control over others. Um, where we sit on that scale doesn't depend on the reality of what we do or don't have control over. So separate your locus of control, what you believe you have control over, from the reality of what you actually do and don't. And I like to tell people to break things down into smaller pieces of control when you're looking at something you actually have no control over. So I have no control over how traffic's going to be on any given day. There might be an accident on the road, there might not be, but what do you have control over? Well, you can go somewhere super early. My girlfriend likes to arrive at the airport 4 hours early, no matter what. And we're sitting there for a really long time waiting for the plane to take off, but we know we won't miss a flight, right? The other thing is looking at and that's why I put environment into it, looking at what you can control about the environment or the people or the tasks. Sometimes you might need to reprioritize tasks, and that solves a problem. So it's looking at those things. So that's why I always say objective, task, environment, people, then the problem.
Very cool. I hope, yeah, people are taking notes, but if not, this video will be available afterwards, so don't you fret. Okay, so Aiden, we got two more questions. Aiden had a follow-up question, and then we've got another question from 5993. So let's start with Aiden's follow-up, which is, I saw you were at Unity. Is having a free tier that has an income cap worth considering? Or is this overhead not worth it as a smaller SaaS?
That's a good question. I would say it depends on the industry and your customer, right? The the thing with like income caps and one industry beyond just the gaming and the monetization space. So people can use Unity for game monetization. So their income caps and how much they pay is based on, and Epic Games does something similar. And they're always changing their models. Sometimes they think it's a great idea, and then other times they're like, "Oh no, it's a bad idea." And if you're familiar with the Unity runtime fee fiasco, you'll realize that they tried to all of a sudden change the monetization model that would drastically impact almost every company across the board, with unintended consequences on their customers, and it became a huge thing in the news, and there was a lot of backlash on what they were doing like that. Even though they were revising their model into what Epic Games pretty much already had in terms of something similar to the way they were monetizing based on monetization tiers, if you will. But income caps are a very similar thing. If a company's revenue is a certain size, for example, um, in a lot of the like business intelligence site. I'm trying to think of a couple. There's a couple of, they're not like Stripe. I forget the name of the company, but it was like a billing, invoicing, customer management. It was like a pretty intensive, and like revenue operations, actually like tracking for exit, like due diligence of somebody's revenue and their customers and separating all that out, which is like great. But they charged based on income caps in terms of like, is your revenue above 5 million? Is it above 15 million? And like 100 million, they'd lump it into different categories, and they would charge you differently depending on your company size. Um, there's a lot of hesitancy for a ton of different customers on using apps like that because there's a lot of unknowns. When's our revenue going to change? Are we overcharging or being undercharged at any point in time based on where we actually sit within this uh, revenue cap? And it gets a little sticky. I know from a procurement side, when I work with a startup, I usually use a little muscle in terms of negotiating with companies that have those caps. I will have them raise caps if we're in a certain situation, or change their monetization model if I can, if I have the negotiating power to do so. Um, so it's a interesting question. I think it depends on the industry. It depends who your customers are, and it depends on how well you've actually figured out your monetization strategy. Because when you think about even just like regular tiers in SaaS, that is the step ladder to charge more. And people can very clearly see if it's fair or not based on the value that they're getting at each tier. It's a little bit harder to convey that specifically with certain companies. But if you're going right to enterprise, regular consumers are not going to use your product at all. You're only B2B and you're only focusing on mid market to large enterprise customers. I think it might be a little bit easier to get away with that model. Um, the lowest, the startups, if you use that model, the smaller companies, small businesses, even all the way up to mid market, should feel like it's not actually imposing anything on them, that cap. Because if you think about it, like the lowest tier of SaaS without being the free tier, unless it's actually a monetization model. I mean, the lowest tier in Unity, I don't think it's still free, or Epic Games was free. Especially for Unreal Engine, I think people would build their games, and until they hit like $1 million in revenue or something, the running on Unreal Engine was free. I forget what the exact amount was, but you can have that as your freemium model if you're thinking about something like that. So I don't know. It's one of those things where if it works for the customer and it makes sense in the industry, then it might be the way to go. Uh, it's tough if an industry is not accustomed to that and you're trying to force it. It creates a barrier to entry. And I always tell startups, especially when you're building a product, you need to reduce the barriers to zero if possible.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and I'm glad you ended with that too, because it also circles back to the conversation about customer discovery and spending time talking to these people. And if someone's trying to create a new product, a new service, a new business around these things, if you haven't yet shadowed people and watched their workflow, map that workflow, and then have conversations about that workflow, you are missing a huge component of your research into who you're trying to serve. And you're lacking the insights to really understand, again, what their motivations are, but more than that, their expectations. And that's where the friction is being created, because they have set expectations from the market that they're already, a part of, the products that they're using, and how those products are being monetized and how they're paying for those products, right? Or services. And when you present something that's drastically different or new, unexpected, all of a sudden it's creating friction because that expectation wasn't met. And now it feels unfamiliar. It feels scary. And they might not be able to articulate those feelings, those emotions to you and share that correctly. But that's what's happening internally. Like change by its very nature in most people is creating discomfort, even if that's good change, because it is unfamiliar and they need to acclimate to that. And like Craig, you're saying, by reducing that friction, instead of forcing someone to adapt, you're now allowing them to more organically adopt these new things, these new ways of doing things. So I think that's really brilliant insight to share. We got one more question from 5993. I'm in the process of opening a retail cannabis dispensary. At it for a little over 3 years. Have possession of a location since last summer. Running out of runway space, financials, while waiting for the state to do their part. Any advice on raising some funds for floating a non operational business until it becomes operational without giving away what I've built?
Interesting. I was at a conference last week where I met people in the cannabis space. Uh, it is very tough, and that's one of those things where it really is dependent on the state for a lot of things, how fast they move, and it's scary because this has been an ongoing dependency on the entire cannabis industry for decades. Since I know maybe 20, what was it, 2005, 2006 maybe is when California started using it for medical purposes and things like that. So you started seeing these dispensaries popping up, and then it uh ever since then it's been this whole thing of like how fast can the industry actually move. The companies that are growing cannabis and things like that are constantly reducing prices, and it's almost, in some instances it feels like it's a race to zero with some of the stuff going on until the state actually creates the legislation and the frameworks and the things that can actually be conducive to a growing industry for the cannabis industry. Um, I think it is a tough spot. Now, in terms of investment and things like that, um, I'm not the best person because I don't, even though I years ago invested a little bit in cannabis, but that was a little while back. Um, I'm trying to think. I met some really good people at this conference last week who are very, very well tapped into that kind of thing. I would look at, and there was someone I met at the conference who is part of a family office that focuses on investment. If you don't know too much about family offices, they are investment groups, vehicles that are typically catered to ultra high net worth families or people who are injecting capital into different things, and they typically hold those companies long term. So if you're focusing on an exit rather than growing a company, a family office is definitely probably not the route to go there. But they typically like to invest and hold assets for quite a while and add them to their portfolio. Um, there might be some for cannabis for something that you're looking for. Well, I know there's one because I met them at the meeting, the conference a while back. I'm not sure if I got their information, but it's something to look at and research the path to investment and who would invest in certain situations and things like that. Um, the tough thing right now, I think, for some investors is that the dependency on state and federal government, and it's kind of two different things that are operating there, state and fed. Um, Looking at the outlook that investors have towards the future of the industry at those two tier levels, because they're very dependent, state and local. Um, and because the local government has such a big impact as well as federal, I'm not sure where you're located, but it could be either super challenging or easier to operate in a particular area where you're at. One of the big things is that the easier it is to operate, the more competition might come into a particular area, and that could affect the market share that your dispensary actually has. So that's another thing to look at and monitor is they say location, location, location. It sounds like you're already set up shop somewhere, maybe. So if you are, think about the area and the strategy and the different things that could bring people towards your dispensary to actually create that traffic that you need there as well.
Yeah, they share there in New York State. But yeah, like touching on this too, again, going back to other conversations that we've had and insights that you shared, like the relationships, right? Like seek out other dispensary founders and ask them, like, how did they approach this? How did they manage this and navigate these challenges? See if they have recommendations for funding sources, capital sources. See who they worked with, and you don't have to go to like direct competitors. If you feel like they're direct competitors, you can reach out to other dispensary founders, operators who are in a different city or a vastly different kind of like market within the state where maybe you're up in Buffalo, right? That's a very different market than Manhattan, right? So you might be very well suited and designed for the Buffalo market, and that other dispensary they want nothing to do with that, right? Buffalo people, they're crazy. What are they doing? Like, yeah, I know the Sabres are in the playoffs for the first time in like 30 years or something, but they got to calm down, right? Manhattan people don't behave like that, right? But maybe you love that. And so there's a disconnect in terms of who you're trying to serve and who they're trying to serve. But the same process of navigating bringing this business to market and going through the regulations and securing funding and capital and other resources that might be required, they've done it. So don't be shy, and you can be transparent and honest. Be like, hey, look, I really appreciate and or I really admire what you've done with your business. I'm working on my own. Here's where we are in the process. I'd really deeply appreciate if I can buy you coffee, spend like 20 minutes with you. Just I'd love to hear about how you handled this. Or I'm struggling right now, as you shared with us. Just tell them that. Be like, hey, do you have any like suggestions, advice, feedback of how I could handle this? Right? Just remember, we're all part of the same community, right? The tide lifts all boats. Make that kind of like the premise of how you approach other people and you engage with other people. So again, they feel empowered to support you, knowing that it's supporting the entire community that you both share, right? So hopefully that's helpful too. Yeah, Craig, any other final thoughts, ideas?
Yeah. The other thing is getting to events with influential people in that industry. I know people have their, I'm going to call it like personal branding or generate a lot of influence in the cannabis industry itself. Go to events where those people are at. I use ChatGPT or Gemini sometimes with deep research to like really dig into events and get snapshots on what they're about, who typically attends, how much they cost if I have a certain budget that I want for specific types of events, and have it create that that type of sheet. I even tell it to put it in a Excel doc so that I can download it and literally see in columns all the data that I wanted. And I basically organize event schedules that way to really make sure that I'm targeting because sometimes it's really hard to get the right ROI from an event. When you go to a conference, can you lock in at least one customer to cover the expense of the entire conference? And then, of course, beyond that, so having those kind of metrics in mind to get the ROI from events. But I feel like in your situation, talking to people and networking, and you might even get into conversations where somebody was in the situation that you are currently in, and they might have some great insight as well on moving beyond and getting further ahead.
Sorry, I was muted. But yes, yeah. I mean, the networking, the community building aspect of this is so invaluable and so overlooked by so many because whatever challenge you're faced with, whatever resource you need, it could be the difference of just knowing one person, just one person, right? And that's like in a very lucky, ideal situation, but in reality, it's, maybe that one person knows another person who knows a person that can help, right? But the more you're present and active and positively engaged in the community that you're a part of, the more likely people will look to you and see you as someone that they want to support. They want to see succeed, right? So yeah, I don't know. Just do your best to be a good neighbor and put yourself in situations where you're meeting these people. And with the the conferences and events, like I know some of those can be extremely predatory pricing. I yell about this a lot. I am active yelling at organizers in my own region often because of this. That said, it never hurts to reach out to those organizers and be like, "Hey, I'm struggling a bit with finances at the moment. I'd really love to participate and attend. Do you have any options available? Is it possible that you'd be willing to give me a ticket? Just again, be transparent and honest. Be vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable. There's certain situations again where you want to put your best foot forward and present yourself in a way that exudes confidence and competence, but not at the cost of lying or hiding certain things. Because if you're more honest, more transparent, it gives people more opportunity to know what your struggles are and how they can help you overcome them and be a part of that. Good people want to do that. So if you're putting in the effort, you're likely to get a lot of good responses from that. But again, manage that appropriately. Don't be an obsessive weirdo who's only focused on your career or your business or whatever ambition is. Have balance, because when it comes time to meeting and spending time with you, like Craig, I love hanging out with Craig and talking to Craig because Craig's not just an obsessed weirdo just working on a startup, right? Craig, you're talking about all kinds of fun stuff, and you're personal training and whatever. We're talking about trying to get a couple friends playing Magic the Gathering together, right? Just silly things. You're a human being. Allow that to be understood and seen by people that you're fully dimensional, not one dimensional. Yeah, and America's SBDC.org, they got offices all over the United States. They're a great organization to reach out to. They're connected with different resources. They're funded by the SBA, government arm that's all about small business. Yeah, they'd be helpful in terms of connecting to possible grants, advisors, consultants, mentors, and yeah, capital sources. So don't be shy. All right, Craig, we went over as usual because you're amazing with your time and patience with this. I want to thank you for being a part of helping us and helping the community. Everyone asking questions, thank you so much. Craig, before we go, any last bits you want to announce, share with people? Yeah.
Just to wrap up and circle back to OTEP, objective, task, environment, people, and problem. That will probably also help with the figuring out the cannabis stuff as well. Think about the objective, what you really absolutely must do to make sure that your dispensary is up and running. Um, Obviously, environment has a huge amount to do with it. Another thing to look at and a framework to look at is uh they call it what was the name of it? It focuses on the environment, the politics. It's called a pestle map essentially, and that's PESTLE. I forget all the things in it. I can pull that up, but it's great to look at to overcome. um it's okay, so it stands for political. So obviously that has a huge play. That's the first thing. Economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So it's looking at factors that affect a problem or a company's strategy, and how they operate in their environment. So kind of break down those things, and it's worth looking. Again, that's PESTEL. It's called a pestle map. So that helps. Problem solving is a huge thing. One thing that I tell companies to do, and this I got from building teams all over the world, in Bangalore, in Australia, in different parts of Canada, and across the US. Uh, when people or teams or companies are problem solving, sometimes the problem seems so massive and so unsolvable that people kind of lock up and they can't move forward. They don't know what to do. A problem that is that big is usually a series of smaller problems. So, what I tell companies to do is create breakdown problems, is what I call them. So, instead of looking at this giant, massive problem, break it down into smaller and smaller components. And then you can start seeing what you can actually tackle and you can easily solve, what might take some resources or time, and what you don't have control over. I think that's a pretty big theme that we had today, is figuring out what you actually have control over and what you don't. So always break problems down into smaller units, because that's a lot easier to solve than trying to tackle this giant immovable object of a problem that a lot of people face. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I can close with, is some problem solving technique there.
I love it. I think it's a wonderful note to end on because progress is still progress, no matter how small. So remember to celebrate that too. Thank you so much, Craig. You're always wonderful. Yeah, might be back soon because we're having fun. Everyone
Yes,
else, oh, sorry. Yeah, everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful week and time. And yeah, Craig, thank you again so much.
of course. Awesome. Take care.